Hey, where'd you get those shoes?
I just bought them. Here's my receipt.
He couldn't afford those. He stole them.
I saved for 8 months.
Hands behind your back. You're under arrest.
Joshua Ortega stood at a bus stop in Buckhead, Atlanta, holding a shopping bag from Soul Haven Boutique and feeling like the 8 months of working weekends at a grocery store had finally paid off. He was 17 years old, 3 days away from his 18th birthday, and the limited edition sneakers in that bag represented more than just shoes. They represented hard work, discipline, and a promise kept between him and his parents. He had saved $2,400 from his paychecks. His parents had added $2,600, and together they had given him exactly $5,000 to buy the sneakers he had been researching for months. The receipt in his hand proved every dollar was legitimate. But Jennifer Hayes, a 46-year-old white woman sitting 10 feet away on the same bench, saw a black teenager holding an expensive shopping bag and immediately assumed he had stolen it. She hadn't watched him earn the money. She hadn't seen him maintain a B average to keep his end of the deal. She just saw what she wanted to see. And what she saw confirmed every bias she had ever held. She pulled out her phone and called 911 to report a theft in progress. And when Officer Gary Taylor arrived and Jennifer pointed at Joshua, Taylor didn't ask to see the receipt Joshua was holding. He didn't call the store to verify the purchase. He didn't conduct even the most basic investigation. He just looked at Joshua's worn clothes, listened to Jennifer's accusation, and made a decision that would destroy his career and cost Jennifer $280,000. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Let me know in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? What Officer Gary Taylor didn't know was that Cordell Lopez, the store employee who had sold Joshua those sneakers 23 minutes earlier, was still inside Soul Haven Boutique finishing his shift. That Cordell would hear the commotion outside, look through the window, and recognize the teenager he had just helped. That Cordell would run out to intervene and confirm the purchase was legitimate. And that when Taylor grabbed Cordell's phone and deleted the video evidence, he would mention that the store owner, Michael Barnes, a wealthy black businessman with a reputation for destroying racist cops through expensive lawsuits, owned not just this store, but 4 others across Atlanta, and that Barnes had successfully sued the Atlanta Police Department twice before. What Jennifer Hayes didn't know was that her pattern of calling police on black and Latino people for imaginary crimes had finally caught up with her, that her previous complaints in her old neighborhood had been documented and would be discovered, that her 911 call would be recorded and played in court, and that her jealousy, because she had been in that same store an hour earlier and couldn't afford the sneakers she wanted to buy for her own son, would be the evidence that proved racial bias and would cost her everything. Joshua Ortega had been planning this purchase for 8 months. He was 17 years old, a senior at North Atlanta High School, and the sneakers he wanted weren't just any sneakers. They were a limited edition collaboration between a famous designer and a legendary athlete, released in quantities so small that only a few hundred pairs existed in a size anywhere in the country. The price was $5,000, an amount that would have been completely impossible for Joshua to afford on his own. But his parents had made him a deal at the beginning of his senior year. If he maintained a B average or higher in all his classes, if he kept his part-time job at the grocery store without quitting, and if he saved as much money as he could from his paychecks, they would contribute the difference he needed to buy the sneakers for his 18th birthday. Joshua had done exactly that. He had worked every weekend stocking shelves at Kroger. He had picked up extra shifts during school breaks. He had saved every dollar he could, cutting out everything that wasn't essential. By October 2021, he had $2,400 in his savings account. His parents, true to their word, had deposited $2,600 into that same account, bringing the total to exactly $5,000. His grades had stayed solid, a 3.4 GPA by the end of his junior year, and he was on track to finish his senior year with similar numbers. He had kept his end of the deal, and his parents had kept theirs. On Saturday, October 16th, 2021, Joshua walked into Soul Haven Boutique in the Buckhead shopping district of Atlanta. The boutique was the kind of store that specialized in luxury sneakers, limited edition releases, and collaborations that made each pair feel less like footwear and more like collectible art. The storefront had floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek modern displays, and prices that reflected the exclusivity of what they sold. Joshua had called ahead the day before to confirm they had his size in stock. The employee who answered had told him they were holding the sneakers for him and would keep them on hold for 24 hours. Joshua had texted his parents immediately to let them know he would be going to make the purchase the next day. When Joshua walked into Soul Haven that Saturday afternoon, he was dressed in plain clothes. A black t-shirt, dark blue jeans, and a pair of gray sneakers he had been wearing for 2 years that were starting to show their age. He carried a black backpack over one shoulder and his phone in his hand. He looked like a typical teenager, and to anyone paying attention, he looked nervous and excited. The store employee who greeted him was a black man in his late 20s named Cordell Lopez. Cordell had been working at Soul Haven for 4 years and had seen every type of customer walk through the door. He treated everyone with the same level of professionalism, whether they were buying 1 pair or 10. When Joshua told him he was there to pick up the sneakers that had been placed on hold, Cordell smiled and told him he had made an excellent choice. Cordell brought out the box, opened it carefully, and let Joshua try on the sneakers. They fit perfectly. The design was exactly what Joshua had seen in photos online. The quality was undeniable. Joshua stood up, walked around the store in them, and when he looked at Cordell and said he would take them, Cordell could see how much this moment meant to him. The transaction took about 12 minutes. Joshua paid using a debit card linked to the account where his parents had deposited their contribution. Cordell processed the payment, printed the receipt, placed the sneakers back in their box, wrapped the box in tissue paper, and put everything into a branded Soul Haven shopping bag with rope handles. He handed Joshua the bag along with the receipt, shook his hand, and told him to enjoy his birthday gift. Joshua walked out of the store at 2:11 p.m., holding the shopping bag in one hand and his phone in the other. The smile on his face was the kind that came from achieving something through hard work and discipline. He walked directly to the bus stop outside the boutique, sat down on the bench, and sent a text to his parents with a photo of the shopping bag and the caption, "Got them. Thank you so much." What Joshua didn't notice was the woman sitting on the same bench about 10 feet away, staring at the shopping bag with an expression that mixed jealousy and suspicion in equal measure. Jennifer Hayes had been sitting at that bus stop for 30 minutes, and she had been in a terrible mood for most of that time. She had walked into Soul Haven Boutique an hour earlier with the intention of buying a birthday gift for her 16-year-old son, whose birthday was 2 weeks away. She had looked at several options, had found a pair her son would have loved, and then she had looked at the price tag, $4,200. That was far more than she could afford. She had tried to justify the purchase in her mind, had considered putting it on a credit card, but ultimately she had walked out of the store empty-handed and frustrated. Now she was sitting at the bus stop waiting for her ride home, and she looked over and saw a Latino teenager holding a shopping bag from the exact store she had just left. The bag was unmistakable, white with elegant lettering and rope handles, and Jennifer's mind immediately started making assumptions that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with years of accumulated bias. She looked at Joshua's clothes, she looked at his worn sneakers, she looked at his backpack, and she thought to herself, there's no way he bought those. No way a kid dressed like that could afford anything from that store. He must have stolen them. In Jennifer's mind, shaped by stereotypes and prejudice, there was simply no scenario in which a Latino teenager could legitimately purchase expensive items from a luxury boutique. She didn't consider that he might have saved for months. She didn't consider that his parents might have helped him. She didn't consider that he might have worked for the money. She just saw what she wanted to see, and what she saw confirmed every assumption she had ever made. Jennifer pulled out her phone, moved slightly on the bench so Joshua wouldn't notice, and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, 911, what's your emergency? Jennifer's voice came out urgent and breathless. I'm witnessing a theft. There's a young Latino boy at the bus stop outside Soul Haven Boutique on Peachtree Road in Buckhead. He just walked out of the store with stolen merchandise, expensive sneakers worth thousands of dollars. You need to send someone immediately before the bus arrives and he gets away. The dispatcher asked the standard follow-up question, "Did you see him steal the items?" Jennifer hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then said, "I know he stole them. There's no way he could afford them. He's wearing old, ratty clothes and looks broke. Just send someone now before he leaves." The call was logged and dispatched to the nearest patrol unit. Officer Gary Taylor, who was 3 blocks away finishing a traffic stop, received the call and activated his lights. Officer Gary Taylor was 38 years old with 9 years on the Atlanta Police Department. Over those 9 years, he had built a pattern that his supervisors had documented in his personnel file but had never seriously addressed. Taylor had been the subject of 6 formal complaints from Black and Latino residents, all describing the same behavior: stops without probable cause, aggressive questioning, assumptions of guilt based on appearance, and refusal to listen to explanations or verify information. All 6 complaints had been investigated internally and dismissed with verbal warnings and additional training requirements that Taylor completed but never internalized. The data told an even clearer story. Over the past 2 years, Taylor had conducted 47 traffic stops that resulted in no citations, no arrests, and no enforcement action. Of those 47 stops, 43 involved Black or Latino drivers. Buckhead's demographic breakdown showed the area was 68% white and 32% minority. For Taylor's stops to result in 91% minority drivers was statistically nearly impossible without intentional targeting. The numbers were in his file. The pattern was clear, but no one had ever done anything to stop it. Taylor pulled up to the bus stop at 2:17 p.m., less than 6 minutes after Jennifer's call. The first thing he saw was Joshua sitting on the bench holding a shopping bag and looking at his phone. Taylor got out of his patrol car, and his hand moved instinctively to rest near his service weapon as he walked toward Joshua with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from years of treating people as suspects before asking questions. "Hey," Taylor said, his voice loud and sharp enough to make Joshua look up from his phone. "Where did you get those shoes?" Joshua looked confused. He glanced at the shopping bag, then back at Taylor. "I just bought them, sir. Here's my receipt." He reached into the bag and pulled out the receipt, extending it toward Taylor. Before Taylor could respond, Jennifer Hayes stood up from the bench, and her voice rang out loud enough for everyone at the bus stop to hear. "He couldn't afford those. He stole them. Those sneakers cost thousands of dollars." Taylor turned to look at Jennifer, and instead of questioning her claim or asking how she knew the price, he nodded like she had just confirmed what he was already thinking. He turned back to Joshua, ignoring the receipt still extended in Joshua's hand. Joshua's voice got firmer. "I saved for 8 months. Taylor cut him off. "Hands behind your back. You're under arrest." Joshua's confusion turned to disbelief. "What? I didn't steal anything. I have my receipt right here. I just showed it to you." Taylor pulled out his handcuffs. "I said hands behind your back." "But I have proof. Just look at the receipt. Call the store. They'll confirm." Taylor grabbed Joshua's arm and spun him around roughly, forcing his hands behind his back. Joshua tried to pull away, but Taylor twisted his arms with enough force to make Joshua wince. The handcuffs snapped into place with a metallic click that seemed impossibly loud in the afternoon air. The shopping bag fell to the ground, and Taylor kicked it aside like it was evidence of a crime. By now, a crowd had started to gather. Pedestrians walking past had stopped to watch. Other passengers waiting at the bus stop were pulling out their phones and recording. And the whispers started spreading through the crowd, loud enough that Joshua could hear every word. "He stole those sneakers. I heard they cost thousands. Can't believe he thought he'd get away with it." Jennifer Hayes stood off to the side with her arms crossed and a satisfied smirk on her face, looking like she had just performed a public service. Inside Soul Haven Boutique, Cordell Lopez was finishing his shift and preparing to clock out when he heard raised voices outside. He walked to the window and looked out, and his stomach dropped when he saw Joshua standing in handcuffs with a police officer beside him and a crowd gathering around. Cordell didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket and phone, pushed through the glass doors without even clocking out, and sprinted toward the bus stop. "What the hell are you doing?" Cordell shouted as he ran up. "That boy didn't steal anything. I sold him those shoes less than half an hour ago. He has his receipt. Did you even bother to check it?" Taylor turned to look at Cordell, and his expression shifted from authoritative to irritated. "Mind your business. This is a police matter. Step back or you'll be interfering with an official investigation." Cordell didn't step back. He stepped forward. It is my business. I work in that store right there. I processed his payment myself. He paid in full with a debit card. The transaction went through. He has a receipt. Everything about this purchase was legitimate, and you're arresting him for nothing. Cordell pulled out his phone and started recording, holding it up so the camera was pointed directly at Taylor. You have no legal reason to arrest him. I'm confirming as an employee of the store that sold him those shoes that he didn't steal them. He paid for them, so whatever reason you think you have isn't enough. Taylor's face flushed red. He took a step toward Cordell, leaving Joshua standing on the sidewalk, still in handcuffs. His voice got louder. I'm not going to tell you again. Put that phone down and leave, or you're getting arrested too. Taylor reached out, grabbed Cordell by the collar of his shirt, and pulled him close enough that their faces were only inches apart. Then he reached out with his other hand, snatched Cordell's phone, and stopped the recording. He tapped the screen several times, deleted the video, and shoved the phone back into Cordell's chest, hard enough to make him stumble backward. Cordell caught his balance and looked Taylor directly in the eye. His voice came out calm, but deadly serious. You have no idea who you're messing with. This store is owned by Michael Barnes. You know that name? Taylor's aggressive posture faltered slightly. Everyone in the Atlanta Police Department knew Michael Barnes. Barnes was a self-made millionaire who owned 5 businesses across Atlanta, including Soul Haven and several other luxury retail stores. He was also a civil rights advocate who had successfully sued the APD twice in the past 7 years. Both lawsuits had resulted in officers being fired and the city paying out settlements in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Michael Barnes doesn't tolerate this kind of behavior, Cordell continued. He's taken down cops before, and he'll do it again. This store has security cameras inside and outside. Every word you said, every move you made, it's all recorded. And when Mr. Barnes sees this footage, you're going to wish you had checked that receipt. Taylor looked at Joshua, then at Cordell, then at the crowd of people still recording on their phones. He realized he had made a mistake, but his pride wouldn't let him back down immediately. He muttered something about misinformation from the caller and pointed vaguely in Jennifer's direction, as if this was all her fault. Then he pulled out his keys, walked over to Joshua, and unlocked the handcuffs without saying a word. Joshua brought his arms forward and rubbed his wrists where the metal had dug into his skin. His hands were shaking. You had no right to do that to me. Taylor didn't respond. He didn't apologize. He just got back into his patrol car and drove away, leaving Joshua standing on the sidewalk with Cordell and a crowd of witnesses who had recorded everything. Jennifer, who had been watching from the side, realized that the attention was shifting toward her. People in the crowd were looking at her and whispering. One woman said loud enough for everyone to hear, "She's the one who called the cops. She lied." Jennifer's face turned red. She opened her mouth like she was going to defend herself, but nothing came out. She turned and walked quickly away from the bus stop, pulling out her phone and pretending she had somewhere urgent to be. Cordell walked over to Joshua and put a hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" Joshua nodded, but his eyes were wet, and he was blinking fast to keep from crying. "I didn't do anything wrong. I just bought the shoes." "I know," Cordell said, "and I'm going to make sure everyone else knows too." "What's your name?" "Joshua. Joshua Ortega." "Joshua, I need your phone number and your parents' contact information. I'm calling my boss right now. What just happened to you isn't okay, and the people responsible are going to face consequences." Arms crossed and a smirk on her face. The audio captured everything. Joshua's repeated attempts to show proof, Taylor's dismissive responses, and Jennifer's accusation. He couldn't afford those. He stole them. Barnes watched the footage 3 times. Each time he felt the same anger and determination. He had built his businesses specifically so he would have the resources to fight back against exactly this kind of injustice. He had been racially profiled himself when he was younger, followed in stores, questioned by police, treated like a suspect for existing in spaces where people like him supposedly didn't belong. He had promised himself that once he had money and power, he would use it to protect others from experiencing what he had endured. Barnes picked up his phone and called his attorney, David Chen, who had handled multiple civil rights cases for him over the years. "David, I'm sending you footage. This is going to be a federal lawsuit. Racial profiling, false arrest, false police report, the whole package." Chen watched the footage Barnes sent and called back 20 minutes later. "This is textbook. The officer made zero attempt to verify the information. The woman who called 911 had no evidence, just assumptions based on appearance. We're going after both of them. I'm recommending $280,000 in damages from the woman for filing a false report and emotional distress, and we push for the officer's termination. Do it, Barnes said. And I want to meet with Joshua and his family. They need to know they're not alone in this. The next day, Barnes sat down with Joshua and his parents in his office. Joshua's mother, Maria, was a nurse at Grady Hospital. His father, Carlos, worked in construction. Both were still processing what had happened to their son, trying to understand how a simple shopping trip had turned into a public humiliation that their son would remember for the rest of his life. Joshua sat between them, quieter than usual, and Barnes could see the hurt in his eyes. Barnes spoke directly to Joshua. What happened to you was wrong. You worked hard. You saved your money. You earned those sneakers. And you were treated like a criminal for it. That's not acceptable. And I'm going to make sure the people who did this face real consequences. Joshua's voice came out small. I just wanted to buy shoes for my birthday. I know, Barnes said, and you had every right to do that without being harassed. My legal team is filing lawsuits against both the officer and the woman who called the police. We're going to hold them accountable. And Joshua, I want you to know something important. You're not alone. What happened to you has happened to too many people for too long, and every time we fight back and win, we make it a little bit harder for it to happen again. Barnes's legal team moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, the lawsuits were filed, and the Atlanta Police Department opened an internal investigation into Officer Gary Taylor. What they found was damning. Taylor had been with APD for 9 years. During that time, he had been the subject of 6 formal complaints from Black and Latino residents. All 6 described the same pattern: stops without cause, aggressive behavior, refusal to verify information, and assumptions of guilt based on appearance. All 6 complaints had been documented, investigated, and dismissed with warnings. The pattern had been in his file for years, but no supervisor had ever taken action beyond verbal counseling and mandatory retraining. The data analysis was even more revealing. Over the past 2 years, Taylor had conducted 47 stops that resulted in no citations and no arrests. Of those stops, 43 involved Black or Latino individuals. The Buckhead area where Taylor primarily worked was 68% white and 32% minority. The statistical probability of achieving a 91% minority stop rate through random chance was 0.004%. The numbers proved what the complaints had been saying all along. Taylor was systematically targeting people based on race. Jennifer Hayes' background was investigated as well. Neighbors from her previous residence in Marietta, a suburb north of Atlanta, came forward with statements that painted a disturbing picture. Jennifer had a documented history of calling police on Black and Latino people for minor or non-existent infractions. She had called police on a Black delivery driver who was dropping off a package at a neighbor's house, claiming he looked suspicious. The driver worked for FedEx and was in uniform. She had called police on a Black family having a barbecue in a public park, claiming they were being too loud and didn't belong there. The family lived 3 blocks away and had a permit for the pavilion they were using. She had called police on a Latino maintenance worker who was trimming hedges at her apartment complex, demanding to see proof that he worked there. He had been employed by the complex for 6 years. She had called police on Black teenagers walking through her neighborhood, claiming they were trespassing. They lived on the same street and were walking home from school. The pattern was undeniable. Jennifer's 911 call about Joshua was just the latest example of behavior that had been going unchecked for years. And every time, police had responded to her calls, investigated, found nothing, and moved on without ever addressing Jennifer's role in wasting resources and traumatizing innocent people. The security footage from Soul Haven was released to the media as part of the lawsuit, and within 72 hours, the story had gone viral. The video showed Joshua being handcuffed and humiliated for a crime he didn't commit, and it showed Jennifer Hayes in the background with that unmistakable smirk on her face while Officer Taylor violated Joshua's rights. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets across the Southeast picked up the story. The headlines were brutal and accurate. Black teen arrested for buying sneakers he saved 8 months to afford. Officer handcuffs teen despite receipt, store employee confirmation. Woman's jealousy leads to false police report, $280,000 lawsuit. Jennifer Hayes and Officer Gary Taylor became faces of racial profiling overnight, and their names were shared across every social media platform. The videos were watched millions of times. The comment sections were filled with outrage. 3 weeks after the incident, on November 8th, 2021, Officer Gary Taylor was terminated from the Atlanta Police Department. The official findings stated that he had demonstrated a documented and persistent pattern of racially biased policing, had violated department policies on constitutional stops and arrests, and had failed to conduct even basic verification before detaining a minor based solely on a third-party accusation. He was 38 years old with 9 years of law enforcement experience, and his career was over. Jennifer Hayes was arrested and charged with filing a false police report, a misdemeanor criminal offense that carried potential jail time and fines. Her attorney advised her that the evidence against her was so overwhelming that fighting the charges would only make her situation worse. She pleaded guilty, received 6 months probation, was ordered to complete community service, and now had a permanent criminal record. But the criminal charges were just the beginning. The civil lawsuit moved forward, and Jennifer's attorney told her in no uncertain terms that she was going to lose. The trial took place in March 2022, 5 months after the incident. The evidence presented in court left no room for doubt. The security footage from inside Soul Haven showed Joshua making a completely legitimate purchase, documented with a receipt that proved every detail of the transaction. The exterior camera footage showed Officer Taylor arresting Joshua without conducting any investigation, without asking to see the receipt Joshua tried multiple times to show him, and without calling the store to verify information. The 911 call recording was played in court, and Jennifer's voice was crystal clear as she told the dispatcher that Joshua had stolen the sneakers based on nothing more than the fact that she saw a black teenager with an expensive item from a store where she herself couldn't afford to shop. Witness testimony from Cordell Lopez confirmed that he had sold Joshua the sneakers, that the payment had been processed legally, and that Taylor had physically assaulted him and deleted evidence when he tried to intervene. Expert testimony from a statistician analyzed Officer Taylor's stop patterns and testified that the 91% minority rate was statistically impossible without intentional discrimination. Testimony from Jennifer's former neighbors revealed her pattern of calling police on people of color for imaginary violations. The jury heard all of this, watched the videos, reviewed the data, and returned a verdict in Joshua's favor. Jennifer Hayes was ordered to pay $280,000 in damages for filing a false police report, defamation, racial discrimination, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Joshua gave Cordell his information, picked up the shopping bag that had been kicked to the side, and sat back down on the bench. The excitement he had felt walking out of the store was gone, replaced by humiliation and anger and confusion about why someone would assume he was a criminal just for buying something he had worked so hard to afford. Cordell walked a few steps away and dialed Michael Barnes's personal number. Barnes answered on the second ring. "Cordell, what's going on?" "Mr. Barnes, we have a situation. A customer just got arrested outside the store for allegedly stealing sneakers that I sold him 23 minutes ago. The cop didn't check his receipt, didn't verify anything with us, just arrested him based on some woman's accusation. I ran out and confirmed the purchase was legitimate. The cop grabbed my phone and deleted my recording, but I told him you own the store. He released the kid, but the damage is done. The kid was humiliated in front of a crowd, and the woman who started all of this just walked away." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Barnes's voice came through, calm but cold. "Get me the security footage. Get me the names of everyone involved. Get me witness statements and get me that kid's contact information. I want to speak to him and his family personally." "Already done, sir. I'll send everything to you within the hour." "Good. And Cordell?" "Yes, sir." "You did the right thing." Michael Barnes sat in his office that evening, watching the security footage from Soul Haven Boutique, and with every passing second, his expression got harder. The interior camera footage showed Joshua Ortega walking into the store, being greeted by Cordell Lopez, trying on the sneakers, and making the payment with a debit card. The transaction was documented down to the second. The receipt was printed. everything was legitimate. The exterior camera footage showed Officer Gary Taylor approaching Joshua at the bus stop, refusing to look at the receipt Joshua tried multiple times to show him, and arresting Joshua while Jennifer Hayes stood in the background with her, a Jennifer couldn't afford to pay. Her savings were depleted by legal fees. The judgment forced her to declare bankruptcy within 8 months. She lost her home to foreclosure and was forced to move out of state to escape the constant attention and recognition. Her name became permanently attached to the case as a cautionary example of the consequences of weaponizing 911 calls based on racial bias. Officer Gary Taylor never worked in law enforcement again. After his termination, he applied to police departments in 7 different jurisdictions. Every single background check revealed the reason for his firing and the pattern of complaints that had been ignored for nearly a decade. No agency would hire him. He tried working private security, but when potential employers discovered the viral videos and national coverage of his role in Joshua's false arrest, they terminated his applications. As of March 2026, Taylor is working night shifts at a warehouse distribution center, earning $32,000 per year. A steep drop from the $54,000 salary he had been making as a police officer. The Atlanta Police Department, facing public pressure and the threat of federal oversight, implemented comprehensive reforms as part of a settlement agreement with Michael Barnes and Joshua's family. New protocols were established requiring officers to verify receipts and conduct basic investigations with businesses before making arrests in cases reported by third-party callers. Officers were required to call the business, speak to management, and confirm that a theft had actually occurred before detaining anyone. All officers were required to complete redesigned implicit bias training on a quarterly basis instead of the previous annual requirement. The training now included case studies, including Joshua's case, and required officers to demonstrate understanding through scenario-based testing. Stop data was tracked by demographics and published quarterly with statistical analysis. Officers whose stop patterns deviated more than 15% from the area's demographic makeup were automatically flagged for review and additional training. Repeat offenders faced suspension and potential termination. An independent civilian oversight committee was created to review all complaints of racial profiling, with the power to recommend discipline up to and including termination for officers with documented patterns of bias. The reforms were credited with reducing racially disparate stops in the Buckhead district by 63% over the following 3 years. Joshua Ortega used the settlement money to pay for his college education. He graduated from North Atlanta High School in June 2022 with a 3.6 GPA and enrolled at Georgia State University to study business administration. As of March 2026, he is a junior on track to graduate in 2027. The settlement covered 4 years of tuition completely, allowing him to focus on his studies without the burden of student loans. Joshua became a vocal advocate for criminal justice reform. He worked with Michael Barnes' foundation to educate young people about their rights when interacting with law enforcement. He gave talks at high schools across Atlanta, sharing his story and encouraging other young people to speak up when they witnessed injustice. Michael Barnes continued his work as a business owner and civil rights advocate. He used Joshua's case in community training sessions, in meetings with legislators, and in forums about the real-world consequences of racial profiling. His advocacy contributed to the passage of Georgia's Receipt Verification Act in 2023, which codified many of the reforms implemented by APD and extended them statewide. As of March 2026, 5 years after the incident, the outcomes are clear and permanent. Joshua Ortega is thriving in college, using his experience to help others and working toward a future where he can open businesses that treat every customer with respect. Jennifer Hayes is living out of state under a name she rarely uses in public. Her reputation destroyed, her finances in ruins, and her face still recognizable from the viral videos that refuse to fade from the internet. Officer Gary Taylor is working warehouse night shifts, unable to escape the documentation of his bias that follows him in every background check and every Google search of his name. The reforms implemented by the Atlanta Police Department remain in place, and complaints of racial profiling in Buckhead have decreased significantly. The case has become a permanent reference point in discussions about weaponized 911 calls and the responsibility of law enforcement to verify information before making arrests. The security footage is used in police academies, law schools, dispatcher training programs, and community forums across the country as evidence of how quickly assumptions based on race can escalate into false arrests and civil rights violations. The lesson was expensive, public, and permanent. Buying sneakers while black should never result in arrest. Calling the police based on jealousy and racial bias has consequences that include criminal charges, massive financial judgments, and bankruptcy. And officers who ignore evidence and make arrests based on appearance will lose their careers, cost their departments hundreds of thousands in settlements, and become examples of what not to do for generations of officers who come after them. Joshua Ortega never received an apology from Jennifer Hayes or Gary Taylor, but he received something far more valuable: justice, accountability, and the knowledge that his willingness to fight back had created changes that would protect other young people from experiencing what he had endured. If you believe a teenager who worked 8 months to afford his birthday gift shouldn't be arrested for buying it, share this story. What reforms would stop people from weaponizing 911 calls based on race? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this reminded you that working hard and succeeding shouldn't be treated as evidence of a crime just because of the color of your skin, subscribe. We're not stopping until every person can buy what they've earned without being handcuffed for it.